today I'm going to talk about adopting a care perspective in multi-stakeholders collaborative research for in-depth relational values approach and stewardship action. So despite the diversity of nature of values, most policymaking approaches have prioritized a narrow set of values and have often ignored values associated to indigenous people and local communities' worldviews. And the debate around ethics in environmental sciences have been traditionally polarizing on the terms of the relationships between humans and nature. So either humans through instrumental values or nature for itself through intrinsic values. And when I say nature, in its descriptive term. And it may fail to resonate with individual and collective well-being and promote values that are at odds with just and desirable future. But there is a third class of values that are the relational values, and they are focusing on the relationships themselves. And that's very interesting because they promote plurality and diversity of values, and by investigating humans' kinship and connection with nature. So if we consider this definition of relational values, we can also consider that care is a relational value. So it has been defined by the American philosopher Joan Tronto as integrating political, moral, and practical aspects, from a perception commitment to a practice possibility. So the first care aspect is caring about. It is the perception of a need. For example, unfortunately, there is more and more dead birds in my garden. That's a perception. And then you can taking responsibility for it by normalizing the perception. That's the caring of. Since I let my cat going outside at night, there is more and more dead birds. And that's the primer for care action, so the caregiving. I keep my cat inside at night so that it doesn't kill birds. And another important aspect is care receiving, which is a feedback and an adjustment of caregiving. There is no more dead birds in my garden. And depending on the care aspect we focus on, we hypothesize that we can develop different environmental discourses. So an environmental discourse is a shared way of understanding the world and can be classified following two dimensions. So the first one is the extent of the departure from industrialism, which can be reformist, small changes, or radical, deep changes. And it can also be classified with the nature of actions relative to this departure. So actions can be prosaic, small changes within the current system, or imaginative. So we take, for example, the opportunity of the social ecological crisis to redefine society. And based on this combination of dimensions, Madve and collaborators define 4 different types of stewardship, which are the wise use of natural resources, so adaptive, transformative, reformist, and sustainability. And these components are not compartmentalized. So that means that there is space between. So if I adopt a transformative stewardship, I can have elements of the reformist stewardship, for example, in my discourse. So that's why we are going to present it this way, in a more democratic and deliberate way, by keeping the two dimensions of environmental discourses. So stewardship action can be defined by the interdependency of 3 components: agency, knowledge, and care dimensions. And most of the literature investigating stewardship action has been focusing on agency and knowledge, and in a lesser extent on care. This is quite surprising because there is different papers that theoretically highlighted the significant importance of care for stewardship definition. So in this study, we aim to explore the multiple expressions of care as situated in a particular place, to understand and highlight the importance of the care dimension for stewardship action, and to characterize the importance of indigenous people and local communities to rethink globally our relationships with nature. So we used a case study designed on 2 sites in South Africa, the Kalahari and the Gardenwood, but today I'm going to present you only the Gardenwood results. So the site is located within the George municipality, which is a unique example of social ecological system with a mosaic of land uses, so human activities, and also a scattered and infants national park, which is the Gardenwood National Park. So we first realized preliminary interviews with governance, conservation institutions, residents, and indigenous people in order to co-design the methodology. And we then extended our purposive sampling through a snowballing approach and characterized different stakeholders categories, so the Khoi community, wilderness property owners, informal settlement inhabitants, conservancies active members, sandparks, academics, and Hookville farmers. So the first step of our methodology occurred during a first workshop where we asked people to write on sticky notes elements of their biography, landscape changes, meaningful interactions with wildlife, and demographic changes in order to realize a collaborative timeline. So the aim was to gather temporalized landscape relationships. That's the first step. Then during a second step that occurred during a feedback workshop, we asked people broad question about what is conservation, what does coexistence mean to you? And we asked people to reflect individually on it first, then to share with the other stakeholders members, and then with the global assembly. The aim was to assess stewardship positions among the discourses. Then we identified the stewardship positions using 4 dimensions: vision of human-nature interactions, agents and their motives, facilitators, and dominant knowledge. So we realized a thematic analysis of the timeline sticky notes, and we observed that relational values were the main theme, and that was interesting because we didn't orientated or guided the process to be focused on relational values. So that means that it was an efficient methodology to address relational values with multi-stakeholders groups. Now I'm going to present you the significant patterns in the care aspects analysis in the Gardenwood. So for the Khoi community members, it was interesting to see that they mainly focused on the perception commitment aspects of care, so the caring about and the caring of. And this association of caring about and the normalization of it is paramount, and I'm going to explain it a bit better just after. And they didn't express any caregiving or care receiving, so the practical application of care. That's the first pattern. Another interesting pattern was with informal settlement inhabitants. So they expressed the caring about aspect, so the perception commitment, and caregiving. But they didn't express any normalization of this perception commitment. That's interesting because we can say that the act of care is not necessarily linked to the emotional part of care. So that's interesting. And following that, the Conservancy's active members, so unsurprisingly, they focused on the application of the care by caregiving and care receiving, but didn't express any emotional aspect of the care. So that's also interesting because we can ask ourselves if the motivation behind care is coming from an ethic that we apply to ourselves, or if it is coming from the society. So that was an interesting pattern as well, and we found the same pattern in the Kalahari. Concerning the property owner category, it was more difficult to find any significant pattern. So the main reason, I think, is that the category was too broad. So thinking the category is very important for this kind of study. And concerning stewardship positions, so we had a wide variety of stewardship positions, but most of the stakeholder groups adopted reformist stewardship category. So either reformist itself or sustainability. And the only group who formulated the transformative stewardship was the Khoi community, which was also the case for indigenous people groups in the Kalahari. And you can see also that there is some groups that are swinging between categories, from reformist to sustainability or the opposite. So it's interesting because it raises the question of the co-construction of stewardship positions, and that it's not probably not linked to individual positions only, but also a phenomenon, a group phenomenon. Concerning the link between care and stewardship type, so we take our two different methodologies and we compare. So we can see that the association between the emotional care aspect, so caring about and caring of, lead to transformative stewardship, and that was the case also in the Kalahari. So we highlight the importance of the caring of aspect in addressing a care perspective. Because, for example, for informal settlement residents, where there is this lack of caring of, we didn't adopt a transformative stewardship. So we can say, yes, but it's because there is no care receiving aspect. But for Conservancy's active members, they didn't express neither transformative stewardships. That was interesting to highlight the importance of the different care aspects, because we tried to highlight the relationship of care as a whole and stewardship positions, and it wasn't significant at all. So investigating more deeply the care aspect was important. So as a way forward, there is a need to investigate the relationships between care, knowledge, and agency, because I'm going to take the example of the indigenous people group. They didn't express any caregiving. So, and it's difficult to act directly on the care to allow them to practice a care. So we can maybe play on the, act on the agency part by making sure that institutions are flexible enough to welcome a different mode of justification for conservation action by acknowledging that care can be a mode of justification. There is a question also about the possibility to bridge reformist and transformative stewardships. But the question is also what do we preserve? Are we preserving biodiversity or a mesh of relationships, a network of relationships? And I think that's an interesting question, because it could be possible to merge the different positions for a common goal. And another important point is that by using indigenous people and local communities term in its descriptive way, it can be useful to bridge people all together and to integrate them in conservation debates. But we have to be very careful, because this term in a normative way can essentialize indigenous people positions and local communities in conservation projects, and it can be another way of minimizing and marginalizing them, because we don't take into account the individual positions and their history, the different way of motivations, and so on. So thank you for your attention.